The next morning, when Gregnar had not shown up for class, everybody was confused, and this led to one of the most interesting sights anyone had seen at the academy. It was the sight of a human male running at full speed. Many people had never seen a human run so fast, as it was just strange to see this biped bolting down the hallway, just spinning and turning, excusing himself as he ran past people, trying to tell them to get out of my way as he ran up. But yet, that wasn't the weirdest part. The weirdest part was what he was saying as he ran out the hallway and into the courtyard towards the dormitories. Oh crap, 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 oh crap. Everyone was simply just befuddled at this whole thing, yet it was only for a little bit. Many of them had tried desperately to pull out their recording devices as this was going to be a once-in-a-lifetime thing to see, but they couldn't get it out fast enough, as the human turned out to be a whole lot faster than they gave him credit for. When Larry finally got to the dorms, he ran immediately to Gretnar's room. Hey, are you in there? Hey, we need to talk. He didn't get a response at first and wondered if she was even in because he didn't hear anything. And then he heard a little bit of shuffling. He was confused at this, but he waited again. I'm out here. I'm going to wait out here all day, he says. Eventually, the door slowly began to open, but he could hear different voices behind him. He was wondering who that might be. But when the door opened, it wasn't Gretnar. It was her sister, standing very tall and looking at Larry with, again, a bit of vitriol in his eyes. And she just turned and said, What do you want? I need to talk to Gretnar. She here? She doesn't need to talk to you. And with that, Larry immediately shoved his foot inside the doorway, making it impossible for the door to shut. Gretnar's sister looked down at a cheap trick. No, but this is, and he simply rammed his shoulder in, using the rest of his arm to push Gretnar's sister out of the way. He could see Gretnar still curled up in her bed, holding a whole bunch of her blankets around her, seemingly trying to comfort herself. He immediately ran over as Gretnar's sister was about ready to collapse from the sudden impact. She was surprised that humans could actually be this strong. Yet, it came more to the fact that he had surprised, or in this case, ambushed her. He ran over to Gretnar and immediately reached over and gave her a hug. I didn't know, I swear to God, I didn't know, okay? I didn't know. With that, both girls seemed to have a little bit more relaxed look in their eyes. Larry continued, I didn't know that was a forced custom. I really had no idea. With that, Gretnar's sister said, I wondered about that. I wondered if you were just a complete sphincter or what. Is that the nice way of calling me an asshole? Larry said over his shoulder. Gretnar's sister simply growled in the affirmative. Well, in this case, she's right. I screwed this up. I didn't know that getting food up and bringing it to a male was a sign of courtship in forced society. I didn't know. I knew you guys were similar in the ways you were compared to most felines we have on our planet, but I didn't know that was a thing. Because our felines don't do that except for a few, in particular lions. And turning towards Gretnar's sister, you don't quite have the look of a lioness. You're pretty damn close, though. More like a cougar. What's a cougar? Gretnar's sister said. Just look it up. Just look. I'm sure it's something you can find. Just look up human fauna cougar. I'm sure they'll show you a photograph. And with that, he turned back to Gretnar, who was no longer seemingly holding on to her blankets. But she seemed to reach out for him. Are you sure that was all it was? That you didn't want me to go away? No, he said. No, I thought we leveled this out when we talked last time, but I didn't realize until when let me just explain what happened. Larry was trying to step over his words, but trying to make sure this was all good. I went and I found Kim, and I was about to beat his ass for the whole maid costume thing, which, by the way, you looked very cute in, I should say. With that, Greknar's eyes began to open wide, and her ears perked up just a little bit more at the idea of being called cute, or in her translation, attractive. With that, Larry continued, and then he wanted to know what was going on afterwards, if things happened. And I was like, why would things happen? And he explained the whole situation, how in your culture, going out and harvesting an animal and bringing it back and serving it and sharing it with a potential mate, that's how you got your males. I didn't know that. And I didn't mean to insult at all. I didn't want to insult you, okay? I told you I care about you. With this, his hands were on her shoulders. You understand, it was just a lost in translation thing. She looked down and she looked up, and then she smiled, her ears fully extended up now, showing that she was no longer upset. And she simply jumped out with extreme pressure and grabbed a hold of Larry. He immediately fell back as the pressure from all that force was enough to put him down on the floor. He laughed a little bit and gave her a hug, and he could see that Greknar's sister was suddenly standing over them looking down, that massive feline form looking down and seemingly sneering a little bit more again. Larry didn't understand until he realized his hands were not holding fabric. He looked down, he's like, yeah, this, not the right time, he whispered in her ear. She pulled back, kind of exposing herself, and he tried to keep his eyes focused on her eyes, if nothing else, her ears. Then when is the right time? Well, that's a long conversation, he said. But for right now, you do know you're seriously late for class. Greknar smiled. She looked up at her sister, and they explained a few things back and forth in their own native language. And, well, this was difficult for Greknar now, as she could not enunciate the words correctly. It was almost as though a 3-year-old was trying to read Shakespeare. You can get the point across, but it would be very, very garbled. With that, Larry excused himself so Greknar could get ready. He would be waiting outside. And as they waited for him to leave, they all exchanged a strange glance. And then Greknar simply got his attention. And Larry, of course, turned around but tried to keep his eyes focused on her eyes, because there was something else definitely trying to draw his eyes away. Tell me something. You do still find this form acceptable? Larry turned and laughed. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's just now is not it's not a good time. It's just, why isn't it a good time? Well, first off, your sister's watching. Secondly, we gotta get to class, okay? Did you forget there's a test today in about 20 minutes? As he looked at his watch. That's when Greknar actually looked at the schedule, and immediately those green eyes got very, very wide. Greknar's sister didn't have any classes that morning, so she was not under the impression that they had anything important to do. But immediately, Larry stayed outside and waited for Greknar to get dressed, and then her and her sister immediately vacated the room. Larry simply looked at Greknar. She threw the bag over her shoulders. You ready? Yep. He turned over and looked at Greknar's sister and said, Are you coming? Because if you are, just try to keep up. Greknar's sister seemed to laugh, threw her head back, and had a strange cough-like wispy laugh to her, which was pretty common for a Force to actually use. But by the time she lowered her head, she realized that Larry and Greknar had bolted down the hallway to the point where she was actually having trouble keeping up. She was amazed how fast Greknar was able to keep up the pace with Larry, even though she was still carrying additional weight. They turned the corner with actually better speed and better control than Greknar's sister did. Greknar's sister, the fact that she did not wear clothing, i.e., shoes, was starting to slide on the floor around a bunch of corners. Larry was actually audibly laughing hard as Greknar's sister tried desperately to get some sort of grip, instinctively extending her claws, but that made things much, much worse, as she spun out more than once and crashed into another student who was there. Every once in a while, another student would either be small enough to duck or big enough to jump over. Aside from that, she would end up simply crashing into them or one of the chairs that happened to be in the way. Eventually, they got to class with only a few minutes to spare and immediately sat down and got ready for their test. Greknar's sister was completely out of breath as she got to the door, looked in, and simply stated, "How did you do that?" Larry simply turned up and said, "Easy, she's human now." With that, Greknar's sister looked at and just shook her head and just left, seriously wheezing heavy as she walked away. They were able to finish their midterm test and able to go out to lunch. As they sat there, they were sitting next to Vince and his girlfriend and had a very interesting conversation. Actually, Femcast had a lot of questions for Greknar, as Femcast was actually looking into modifying herself a little bit too. Larry started to ask Vince if this was something he wanted to do, or if he had talked to her about all the complications that come with this, the percentages and whatnot, and he was very, very serious. Vince, for the first time in a long time, was deadly serious. "Yeah, I talked to her about it. She still wants to. She sees how good your girl has things now that she's much more human. And she wants to upgrade herself." Upgrade herself? Femcast, what would you want to upgrade to? "Well, you see, I was thinking that maybe I could at least get taller. Maybe I could get some more, I think you humans call it curves." "So you want to be thinner?" Larry asked. "What? No, thinner and bigger. I don't know how to really say this." "Oh," without skipping a beat, Gretna goes, "Oh, so you want these?" as she reached up and grabbed her chest. Larry simply, "Don't do. What did I say before about the whole modesty thing?" "Oh, right, I forgot. Oh, wait a minute." She looked into her shirt. "Oh, I forgot something else today, too." "Well, it's a good thing it isn't cold in here," Vince says. And with that, they all shared a laugh. Well, that all except for Femcast, as she had no idea what the hell they were talking about. Larry eventually asked Femcast, "Have you actually been briefed by anybody in the embassy on this? Because they're going to give you a lot of briefings, right?" he asked over, looking at Gretnar. She confirmed this, and then she went on a very long rant about several different doctors along with embassy personnel who started to talk to her about different things she wanted to do. If she wanted to be bigger or smaller in some areas, what they could do about her height and things like that, things she would have to get used to, things she would lose, which is why she still had those deep green eyes. Why green was because when they genetically modified them to still have the abilities of her species, yet still be human for the most part, they still kind of seemed a little feline, but you would miss that if you weren't looking really close. The fact of the matter is, with the Forced, they found out because of where their genetic codes are, anyone that wanted to turn into what Greknar is now would all have these deep emerald eyes. And they would be very similar to a cartoon character back in the day. Or was it comic book, Larry was thinking. He was trying to remember from when he was a child, but he couldn't quite remember what it was. Kind of knocking his brain a little bit, trying to figure it out. The conversation continued. "Don't worry, we've talked in length, and yeah, we got an appointment. We're going there in about a week." "Really? That soon, huh?" Larry looked over at Femcast, and she simply nodded. "Yeah, I want to get this started. I think it would be really nice." Larry asked, "You do realize, since you're kind of a aquatic species, you might not have that ability anymore? Are you able to break away from your family like that, I mean, it's going to be hard to do. As they didn't see, he was reaching over and grabbing Gretnar's hand and squeezing it. He realized he was on a subject that was going to be very difficult for her to deal with. Very difficult. As she had basically lost her younger sister. Her younger sister wanted nothing to do with her. And her father was almost completely out of her life now. He continued with, "Now, Femcast, I want you to understand, you two," and he waved his finger back and forth between Femcast and Gretnar, "need to talk about this because someone, I won't mention who," as he looks over to Gretnar and then turns back, somebody's dealing with some of that shit right now. And remember that 41% plus the 12%? Yeah, I think Vince, you mentioned that before, right? Yep. And we're not joking about that. That's a high percentage. A lot of people gone, and it was not good. It was bad. Okay, let's just say it was bad. It was just Larry was clearly disturbed by this, but it wasn't more than Femcast was willing to fight off. Well, I'm willing to find out if it's worth it. Just make sure that you get everything set up right and you get all the information. Okay? You don't want to mistake this because they can't do it twice. It doesn't work that way. With that, Gretnar jumped in. Yeah, I had to do briefings on even the slightest things. Like what? Femcast asked. Well, I mean, look at this. Gretnar immediately raised her leg up and immediately put it onto the table, putting her foot on the table, stretching her leg up so her knee was bent. With this, her skirt kind of fell down, exposing her entire leg. As you can see, I don't have any body hair. They said this was a really good idea, especially for females. And I mean, what do you think? As she looked over towards Larry and Vince immediately locking his eyes on the bare leg, and Femcast immediately slapping him on the chest. Quit staring. Can't help it. Larry interjected, saying, yeah, I really like it too, but I would really like if you got your foot off the table and stop exposing. Did you forget something else today? Because you're really exposing now. With that, Gretnar actually pulled her skirt up, and everyone kind of was like, whoa, and immediately Larry pushed her hand down. It's like, yeah, you forgot those too. I'm not used to wearing them, Gretnar said. I understand, but after lunch we're going back to your room and you're getting some on. Okay? It is not... It's just... It's a human thing. Let's just say it's a human thing, okay? Really? I thought you guys had a different phrase for that. Femcast asked. Like what? Vince said. I thought you said it's a Jersey thing. With that, both Larry and Vince rolled over laughing so hard you could hear audible farts. They were laughing so hard. It was so bad that even Jenny came up from the other side of the chow hall and asked what was so funny. Unfortunately, Larry and Vince were so deep in hysterics they couldn't answer. And when Femcast told her what she had said, Jenny immediately dropped her tray and proceeded to laugh, not nearly as hard because the setup wasn't as well, but they realized that this was kind of a running gag. When they finally got themselves together, both Larry and Vince had to wipe tears from their eyes since they started belly laughing as they did, and simply looked over, and Larry asked Femcast, so are you ready to train like a human? I know I see you in there with Vince, but I mean, are you ready to actually train like a human? Well, what does that mean? Well, that would mean that we're going to teach you extreme patience. They're going to teach you how to shoot things from very far away. It's incredibly easy once you learn how, Gretnar added. Yep, And also, we're going to make sure you're really strong, really fast. And you know that we're endurance predators. You're going to have to be able to keep up with me. You know, you were kind of out of breath when we went camping. You're not going to be that way anymore. Anything else? Femcast asked. Larry said, oh yeah. We're going to teach you how to be very, very sneaky. With that, they finished up lunch and headed off to the dorms so that Greknar could remember to put her damn underwear on. Afterwards, they went to their afternoon classes and were finishing up when they received some interesting news right around dinner. It seemed as though the Ko, the small, pale aquatic species that they had seen before, had tried to lay claim to the oceans on one of the human settlement planets. It didn't have much more than a couple of colonies on it, and was not a fully established planet yet. So the Ko figured that they would lay claim to the oceans. But this was beyond any type of scope of any galactic treaty they had. Once you have set up a base of operations on that planet, it is yours, as long as it's outside of anyone's normal territories. And with many species slowly, very slowly, still reaching out into the stars, as it takes several decades at least for them to reach out and colonize a world, this leaves a lot of empty space. The Ko believed that they could simply take over the oceans and force the humans to stay out of them. Being the aquatic species they were, it wouldn't be difficult for them to take out small human vessels and take over the oceans, which were more than 80% of this planet. The reason why there weren't so many colonies is the fact that there weren't a lot of places to land any ships of very large size. Most things were barely the size of a human shahuk, and yet every time they said that, the humans would immediately all sound off with Chinook. Yet, this did not stop the fact that the islands, being so small, made it very difficult. It was considered by human standards to be a paradise world. But they worried about having the Ko anywhere close because the Ko had a typical way of taking over planets. They would end up going on to shore, being amphibious, actually, even though they were aquatic, and simply start stealing a whole bunch of supplies, or damaging equipment to the point where most people just got fed up and left. Or they tried to go to battle with the Ko. The Ko could just jump out of the water with amazing speed. Their ability to swim through water at speeds that make a bluefin look like a freaking sea turtle is just crazy. Not to mention, with their intelligence, they're able to outwit many of the other species that decide to go into the oceans, meaning that they could immediately go to something the size of a frigate and be able to get a good head of steam and jump onto the deck and start taking over the ship before anybody even knows what the hell is going on. So the humans had an issue. With that, the humans sitting at the table for dinner looked over at the group of Ko over at their table. It was a species that usually kept to themselves. They didn't talk much unless they were asked a specific question. But the humans looked over at these small, little, pale folks. They had to sit a certain way so that that broad tail didn't actually get squished underneath them. They couldn't figure out why these guys would want to try to take us on. The humans easily outmatched them by at least another 40% of the Ko's total height. They were much smaller. And it was noted that their vessels were much, much weaker, although they could come at them with so many more. The amount of personnel that the Ko have numbers in the tens of billions, which is one of the ways they take over entire planets so quickly. Now they had an issue. If the humanity and the Ko were going to be facing off each other, this could bring some serious tensions in the school. This is not something they wanted. Taché was the first one to say something to the Ko. He wanted to let them know that this was not a battle they wanted. Though they had the numbers, they did not have the sheer veracity to take on the humans. The Ko just looked at Taché, and then they looked back, and then gave him a strange gesture which was tantamount to their version of giving the finger. Tashay did not like this and grabbed one of them by the neck. "What did you say to me, you little bastard?" With that, suddenly, Tashay was being mobbed by over 10 of the damn things as they beat the crap out of him. The problem is Tashay spent just as much time in the gym as everyone else and was immediately able to throw them off and fight them off. And eventually, they were standing there basically in a stalemate. Tashay completely surrounded by the Co, but the Co smart enough to realize that they couldn't go in unless they would risk more serious injury, and many of them were already bleeding. "Have I made my point yet?" Tashay said. The Co simply looked at each other and said something in their own native language, which didn't sound more than a couple of squeals and a couple of clicks. And they simply turned and walked away. One would hope that this microcosm of what happened would be enough to make sure the Co got out of human territory. Most of the species didn't realize that the humans had spread out as far as they did, but eventually realized that humans were an anomaly. They didn't have a central hive mind, or mostly a central government for that matter, as they were very much divided. It was more than commonplace for a single ship to show up on a habitable world that was not claimed yet, that was of human design, and only maybe 10 or 15 passengers would disembark and they would claim the entire planet. This led to most of the other races worrying if they should do the same thing, but it wasn't in their nature, and they didn't think that the humanity could even hold on to a single colony at this rate. But they would find out soon enough. The Co sent an entire invasion force to that colony world. That colony world was not set up for any type of invasion. However, when the Co decided to walk on land and try to peacefully tell the humans to more or less fuck off or die, the humans simply responded, "Bring it on, you scrawny little bitch." The Co did not like this, as they never wanted to be referred to as canines. They found this to be one of the biggest insults ever, as they had been first found by a canine species and used as food, if nothing else. The canine species no longer exists thanks to the Zenshen, actually. The Zenshen went to war with them, and the canine species is no longer a thing. But the Co immediately charged the humans. The resulting melee left every human dead, but over 80% of the Co either dead or completely disabled. Many human ships were dispatched to the planet, and the Co realized that humanity, though divided, would not leave their own leaving to rot. Before the battle was even finished, a distress call had gone out, and as the Co were retreating back into the ocean, several ships littered the skies and began to come down, many of them actually landing on the water, able to float. And this surprised the Co, as there was no way to get into a spaceship. What are they going to do? Jump into the engine compartment if somebody tries to turn it on? Some of these vessels didn't even have an engine to jump into. What the hell were they using as propellant? They couldn't figure this out, but they did see that those that had shown up immediately went to the colonies and were not happy when they found the bodies. Immediately, they went to work, putting them in different types of tubes, different types of pods, and immediately rushing them onto ships. The Co were amazed at this. Were they trying to preserve the bodies? They couldn't understand. I know human medical tech is good, but what were they going to do? They watched, and within 4 of that planet's days, they saw that humans that they thought they had beaten to death, one that they had actually broken its ribs and crushed its organs, another one that every one of its limbs had been snapped and had been left to bleed out from the compound fractures. All these humans were walking around. All these humans were still there. Then they looked again, not all of them. Could they save them all? Could they not save them all? What's going on? And for the first time in known history, the Co actually walked out of the water with their hands off to their sides as a sign that they were not going to attack, but immediately every human drew a weapon, and the Co himself shook in fear right before defecating on the beach. That is when a few of the humans started to laugh, a sound that the Ko do not enjoy at all, and then simply walked up, handed it a translator, and said, "Okay, now what do you want?" The Ko began to ask a series of questions on how this was even possible. And the only response they got is, "You don't know much about humans, do you? We're always too angry to die. Or, in this case, stay dead." The Ko, at that point, feared what they saw. They wanted this technology for themselves, true, but they were afraid of what was coming. If you can't keep an enemy down and they will just keep coming, how do you stop them? And again, for the first time in all their histories, the Ko called for ships and transported all their people off that world, even though it would have been a perfect world for them to expand in. They left, fearing what the humans are. They looked and they couldn't figure out why this was happening. They could get past the claws, the wings, and the tails. But none of these humans even looked the same. It was strange. And they were trying to figure out what was going on. That is, until they talked to the ones at the academy. Then word began to go out that humans had genetically modified themselves, or were able to do so, as they realized that many of the humans that they had beaten, some of them had wings, some of them had claws, some even had gills. Some of them just looked like normal humans. Many of the females had such accentuated parts it seemed almost unnatural the way they were shaped. And yet some were of different colors. Some were blue, some were purple, some were red. It was strange to see this. Wasn't there any consistency? The only thing they knew of humans is what they had seen on the videos and also what they had seen inside the academy. And when they got the word from the academy that the humans were able to actually genetically modify a force, everything made sense. And with that, the Ko immediately sent out a message to all of humanity that they were never going to be humanity's enemy. Ever. Humanity simply sent a message back. A simple question. You want to be our friend instead? That would be the first true time that humanity had gained a true ally. Now, though they had all sorts of trading partners, in fact, they traded with pretty much all of the known universe, but it was very uncommon to actually see a human as they relied on so much automation that most folks didn't even know what an actual human looked like. Even if you did see them, many times they were wrapped up in a suit because they were afraid of some sort of disease, some sort of bacteria that was coming off the other species. It turned out much of humanity himself was what was known as xenophobic and didn't want to actually converse with any of them, usually sticking with voice transmissions, or if they did have to meet in person, they would cover themselves up with a huge amount of fabric, usually some sort of exosuit. Many believe that this was some sort of not just environmental suit, but something to help with strength, and believe that humanity was actually weaker than they put out. But with their showing to the Ko, well, let's just say the outlook on humans changed a bit. And along with this change came an interesting event that happened inside the academy. As it turned out, the Vention, which had just been a simple insect/lizard type species that usually, although annoyed people, left everyone alone, didn't believe that the Ko would simply leave humanity alone and didn't believe that humanity was actually as tough as they thought. So they simply challenged the humans again inside the arena. But this time they would change the game up. They didn't want to be out there and be shot right in between their wings or right at the edge of their tail like so many others. But no, they insisted on the urban terrain course where they would be the defenders, giving themselves the advantage, of course. At first, most of the humans told them to pound sand, but eventually, with all the things that the Vunshin do, as in, they make the humans look weak through societal pressure, sending out all sorts of messages saying how the humans, though they had pushed back the Ko, were actually nothing but bullies. They didn't have the stones to actually go up and face against the Vunshin. This time, they got under the human skin. The female Vunshin that had gotten in Greknar's face before was sitting in her seat just getting ready for class. As she did, she realized someone had walked next to her. As she turned and looked, she saw a human. Oh wait, that wasn't a human. That was a slightly red-haired but feline-looking human. And she did not look happy. With that, she simply dropped the paper onto the Zenshin's desk. The Venshin looked at it, and it was an official acceptance to the challenge. However, there would be a small modification. They would simply start on opposite sides of the urban area, and then they would have to take as much territory as possible within a certain time limit. Of course, this time limit being 7 full planetary rotations, which was more than most of these games went for anyway, or until the other side was completely and totally eliminated. And with that, Greknar looked in the Vunshin's face and said, "All right, bitch, let's do this."